Got it. Okay. So we'll eventually put that on you guys, but for now, so they can see who's talking. Welcome everyone to this launch of House of Art Queer with the author Bex Mui and the astrologer Tai. My name is Greg Newton. I am the co-founder of the space you are in, the Bureau of General Services Queer Division, and we're helped out today by Bree Penzuka, our volunteer. The Bureau, for those of you who are not familiar with us, is a government agency for a government that does not yet exist. And this is the service that we provide, is holding this space for queer culture. So we have regular bookstore hours, Wednesdays through Sundays from 1 to 7. And we stay open later when we have evening events, but we often do afternoon events on the weekends. And we keep a very busy calendar. So if you'd like to be on our email list, you can sign up for that at the back of the room and you'll get an email every other Monday about our upcoming events. So little fun snag, or maybe not fun, but snag, is that we do not have copies of House of Art Queer yet. They are en route, and due to circumstances beyond our control, they're not here today. But Bex is happy to sign a sticker, which you can then insert in said book when it arrives, and it should be here by Wednesday, our next day of business.
We do have a sample of the book.
Yes.
That you can
Peruse. Exactly. And for those of you online, you can always email us to place an order at contact@bgsqd.com. So we are an all-volunteer organization, and we survive in this hostile world through donations, sales, and love and support. So we do have a suggested donation of $10. I'm going to pass around a bag. If you're able to give something, we appreciate it. If not, not a big deal. And if you'd rather buy a book and support us that way, that is a wonderful way of supporting us, and we welcome that. So I'll pass this around. There's change in the bag. You can also Venmo us at BGSQD, which is all around you. You can't miss those letters. And thank you. Yes. Yeah, and those of you online, if you'd like to donate, you can donate on Venmo at BGSQD. So before we get started with today's event, I want to read a land acknowledgement. So the Bureau acknowledges that our organization operates on the unceded land of the Munsee Lenape. We are actively seeking to partner with and provide material support to a local queer Indigenous organization. We hope to make an announcement about this partnership in the near future. But in the meantime, we encourage you to join the Bureau in signing up to make a monthly donation to the American Indian Community Houses Mannahatta Fund. So the Mannahatta Fund, according to its website, is an invitation to all settlers and non-native people who wish to acknowledge the legacy of theft and genocide that comprise the history of New York City and the United States. And you can find out more at mannahattafund.org. All right, so Bex Mui is a biracial, first-gen queer witch, spiritual organizer, certified energy worker, and longtime LGBTQ+ advocate. She is also the founder of House of Art Queer, a spiritual play space for the queer and trans community. Bex is thrilled to return to NYC, where she spent her formative 20s to stir up some magic in powerful queer community. And Tai is an astrologer, brand manager, and globetrotter from Houston, Texas. She began her consulting practice in 2018 during her time studying criminology and law in London, England. After traveling the world, she came back to the USA in 2020, where she began developing the idea that is now Nova Network, a community for spiritual practitioners. Nova, am I pronouncing that correctly? Okay, good. NOVAA, launched with co-founders in 2021 and has hosted in-person and virtual classes, workshops, and events with a variety of spiritual creators and practitioners. Please give them a very warm welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having us. I'm super excited for this conversation. And thanks for folks who are here and folks who are watching. I'm going to talk to us a little bit about House of Our Queer and the book, especially to entice folks who are going to buy it and then come back and get it later because it's that good. And then we're going to have a conversation, and then we'll open it up for your questions. That's kind of our flow for today. I'm super excited to get this opportunity to be back in New York also, and say I've been doing these book talks in different places, but there's something so sweet about being in a city where I have roots and where I have folks I get to see. So just full of a lot of gratitude today. House of Our Queer really came from this time when I was pushed up against the limits of all the resources I had for mental health and didn't have enough. And so I was really at a place in 2020, maybe y'all remember it, when there was just no places to hide, no distractions available. And I was wondering, I was looking at all of the things I had that had kind of caught up with me and trying to figure out, how am I going to recharge myself? I was also at a time when I was doing national advocacy, mostly on LGBTQ issues. And I realized that I was doing a lot of fighting, that I was doing, really deeply in social justice and activist spaces. And there was so much of that work that was really deeply meaningful and important. And it just never ends. There just was never a time when there was a day when I was like, this is the break day. This is it. I can go and fill myself back up and then continue. And so I got to my kind of burnout breakout point in all of that quiet. And I like to ask folks, what was your pandemic truth? Right? What came up for you? What are some of the things that came up for you in that quiet? And for me, House of Our Queer is really, was conceived in that space, in that time. I realized I really needed something, and I wanted to build community. I wanted queer spiritual community, and I wasn't sure where to find it. I wasn't sure who wanted to have the conversations that I was having. My poor partner who is here, and the folks that I was having, and it's always, having these same conversations. I need to find other folks that want to be in these conversations with me, that want to kind of think around these two seemingly different ideas about spirituality and queer community, and figure out how they fit. So it's very fitting to have I here. I'm really excited for that. And so all to say, I launched House of Our Queer January 1st of 2021. And then in that summer, I was approached by Lou Barrett, who's the publisher for Purple Palm Press. And we had kind of conversations around different collaborations. And they're like, I think you should write for me. And I'm an Aries, so I was like, yeah, I'm a blogs writer, write things. I had no idea, luckily, I had no idea what I was getting into, but it was great. The book came from this time when I was trying to figure out, what am I doing? Why did I start House of Our Queer? How did I get here? What is it for? And so you can see in the book, me kind of figuring that out. It's very much a conversation that I was having with myself, and wrestling that I was trying to figure out. And I think there are folks that really know me, many in this room, who might have been on that wondering, where did this come from too? And the book really kind of put that together for me, and was really a helpful process. And so you'll see in each of the chapters, there's a little bit about my story, a little bit about something that I'm using. I use this framework called Spiritual Toolbox, because I was an elementary school teacher and some things don't change. And so the offering here is kind of the idea that we can build and construct our spirituality and the rituals and practices that work for us, and consider those as different tools. And I'm a big fan of yes and. This is working for me, as long as you're doing so with intention and consideration. finding the tools that work for us and not saying, well, that means this is the beginning and the end of that practice, or this is the beginning and the end of my community because of this one tool. I like seeing the different ways that multiple different tools can work for us and that we can lean on at different times. And, so that's a big part of House of Our Queer. And what I'll do in a minute is just read the chapters so you can get a sense of what are the different tools. And in each chapter, there's a little bit of how it's come up for me, my journey around it, how I've used it to kind of build myself up when I need to. And then there's also a section in each chapter of what you can. So there's the hope that there is something that's resonating in my story, but there's also an understanding that we're all coming in our own journeys or our own stories or our own reference. And there's hope that in some of the offerings, there's things like so the first chapter is spiritual roots. And that was really deeply important to me when I was trying to figure out why I was talking about spirituality and where it came from. I really had to go back to say, like, what had spirituality meant for me, where it had come from. And I'm, as I mentioned in my bio, I'm biracial, Chinese and Polish. And so I was raised in a Polish community. I had a bakshi, my grandma, my mom, she's one of 6. I've got a lot of cousins, and we were raised Roman Catholic Polish. So going to the Catholic Church was it was cultural as much as it was religious. It was a big part of how I understood myself and understood the world. And when I moved to New York at 18, I came to college, I found my first queer community, and I was understanding what that identity meant for me and what that meant for my life. And there was this incredible joy and excitement and pain. There was this, whenever we are learning more about ourselves and expanding who we are and expanding our communities, and a community that we've been a part of or that we have roots in isn't able to evolve with us, and there's distance is created, there can be a lot of pain in that. And I call that place the pain place. I talk about that a lot in the book and just what it meant to let myself be in pain, be in anger, how at times which was directed at people, at times which was directed at the institution itself. And I really allowed myself to have that. And then after that, there's a space. So this book is called House of Our Queer, Healing, Reframing, and Reclaiming Your Spiritual Practice. So there's the time for the healing or even just the space and then the healing. And then there was this time where I was just reframing. I realized that even though I wasn't a part of those rituals and I wasn't a part of that community, I was still very much ritualizing my life in ways that I had been raised. And I realized at this point that I actually wasn't sorry about that. So I'll do a quick, just brief reading from that section. In the pain place, I closed the door, locked the door, buried the key, and walked as far in the other direction as I could. And yet, as the years went on and all that fury burned up, and I had enough space and distance, I slowly realized that you can take the Catholic out of the church, but can't take the church out of the Catholic. And this is sort of the thing I had going on. I would say, this is me. I'll never pray again. Later that day, please, nature, don't let it rain. I need to bike home. Me, God has failed me. God never existed. I don't need God. That night, good night, universe. Thank you for watching over me, keeping me safe today. And so I had in many, many ways this relationship. And what I realized eventually when I was ready and when I had time, that there was actually mental health supports that I gained from those rituals, from that community, and that I didn't need to cut myself off from those rituals or those aspects in order to punish the church, I don't know who I was punishing, but I realized I was punishing myself. So what were the ways, and this book is really about reimagining what are the ways that we can, even when there's painful roots, and what can we take from that, and how can we lean into these as aspects for queer healing and queer joy. I do want to get to our conversation, so I will wrap this up, but I'm going to just read again the chapters. So spiritual roots is chapter 1. Chapter 2 is the blessing of queerness. It talks really about centering queerness and this understanding that queer folks have our own intuition, and we're able to listen to that and just the blessing and joy that is. Chapter 3 is prayer reimagined. Chapter 4 is reclaiming Christian roots, sacred sexuality, and honoring the femme divine. Chapter 5 is Buddhist practices and honoring our ancestors. So I'm Chinese on my father's side, but he was born and raised in Malaysia, and I have a big family over there. I'll talk more about it later, but really understanding and kind of thinking around honoring ancestors is a big part of my practice. Chapter 6 is Queer Witch at Your Service. Chapter 7 is Queer Spiritual Practices, Astrology, and Tarot. Chapter 8 is Reclaiming Holidays, and Chapter 9 is Growth Isn't Linear. So we'll talk in our conversation about that, and I'm just going to read a small section from the astrology chapter because Ty's here, and I was like, had to bring in astrology, and then we'll turn over to our conversation. Astrology is one tool among many that I use to better understand myself and others. I've looked into my astrological chart, my Chinese astrological signs, my Myers-Briggs, my Enneagram, my human design, and more. In Chinese astrology, I was born in the year of the ox, an earth branch, and a metal year. You name it, I've investigated myself and those around me with permission. I'm deeply drawn towards self-exploration and better understanding how and why I show up in connection. As a weird child who never really felt that I fit in, I spent most of my life trying to understand what is expected of me in different situations and learning how to better navigate social situations. The funny thing is, in each of these systems, my results or explanations are eerily similar. That's why I explore them all. My queer spiritual practices are based on and guided by my own intuition and supported by rituals that support all the parts of me. Astrology is a system that is according most of my intuition and calling to me at this time. I believe that our sun signs, the signs that represent our inner core, are how we show up in the world as children, and that after puberty, our rising signs come more into play as a new way that we show up in the world. Our moon signs, representing our moods and emotions, are always present and guiding our inner worlds. I used to use sun signs to create my table seating arrangements when I was an elementary school teacher. I was just talking about this. It was helpful to know which young ones were water signs, which little fires. I wouldn't want to put too many Pisces at a table unless they got along with or are happy to be guided by a gentle Virgo or a reasonable Capricorn. But I only use astrology in an expansive way. There are no bad signs, there are no bad matches, and if there were, I don't believe our charts are designed to tell us. They don't tell us who we are or aren't, they don't label or brand us, and we shouldn't cause harm to ourselves or others by using these incredibly enigmatic tools to put people in boxes.
Love that. Hey y'all, what's up? How are y'all doing today? Y'all sound a little quiet, y'all. But I just want to start the conversation just talking about one of the topics you touch on a little bit in the book, but you're traveling right now, actually. So I want to know, how has this experience been for you thus far? Your road trip, so very extensive, and how do you feel like travel affects us as spiritual beings?
Great, yeah. So I'm on a 3-month road trip and book tour. And when I was talking to the publisher about the book tour, about how to bring the book, kind of out there, it was really important to me to take a lot of time. I, like I said, kind of wrote the book in the dark, like in the pandemic time when it felt like there was never going to be an outside world again. And that was powerful and important. But the goal for the book and the goal for House of Art Queer is to build community and have conversations, create more spaces to have these talks. And so I really wanted to be able to be in the actual living, breathing room with folks. And also, you asked kind of about travel. And for me, I'm from on both sides of my family. So my father's family is mostly still in Penang, Malaysia. My mother's family is mostly still all on the East Coast. And so I'm from two sides of the family of folks that are very rooted, who live and have kind of created new families generation after generation in the places where they are. And then me. And so I think, that happens a lot of times where folks, we aren't made to stay in the places where we're from. And there's some spaciousness that we need in order to have that, be able to see ourselves as adults and find and build the communities that we're needing. And for me, travel's really done that. It's helped me to see people living in ways that I wasn't seeing, and to imagine lives and futures and presence for myself in ways that I wasn't raised with, that I didn't get to see. And so this tour, I wanted to see what queerness and queer spirituality means for folks that in places that I've never been to.
Right, that's so cool, and like that's such a great way to approach it. I think it's very expansive, like you were mentioning earlier. I actually want to touch base on the fact that you talk a lot in the book about your biracial identity. Is there a particular reason that you bring this up so much in the book?
Yeah. Part of it is like, it's a book about me. That is me. But no, when it comes to spirituality as well, I think, when I left the church, or was forced out of the church, or left the church behind, leaning on and really like understanding Buddhist practices was a big part of healing for me. And so, and thinking about those roots, it's a way that, even though I was raised like in a small town and in a Catholic church that was very much like, this one circle is the way, the truth, and the light. There isn't like a lot of gray in Catholic churches, and especially in mine, but I always had my father. So even though I was raised that, I always had this message of like, but not that, but also this. And it was this way that there was always a little bit outside, a little bit something else. And I will just say, like, as a biracial person, there's a lot of complicated things around it, but one of the gifts is that I understand how to feel like I'm part of the community deeply and rootedly, even if I'm not the same as folks in it.
That's such a good point. Wow, I love that. Actually, one of my favorite quotes from the book is, "I'm tired of the myth that there is an inherent division between LGBTQ people and religion or spirituality." How do you feel like House of Art Queer is helping break those stereotypes and barriers? Because I love that you mention this so frequently through the book, really doubling down on the fact that, reclaim your spiritual power. As a queer person, don't allow those negative experiences or maybe being shunned by the culture itself to remove you from having that beautiful opportunity to connect with something greater than yourself.
Thank you. Yeah, honestly, it's also part of why I started House of Art Queer. I was like, am I the only person thinking about this? Am I the only person? And it's like every other aspect of coming out that I've ever had, in the many weaving ways that we come out, that when I started sharing it, when I started naming it, when I started saying, this is a part of me and it's important to me, everyone else came out. Suddenly so many people were raised Catholic. Suddenly so many people had conversations. Suddenly people wanted to, saw what I was sharing and were able to say, this is something I'm thinking about too. And so it's like everything, just the visibility is important. It does matter. And just having that, having chances and opportunities to dispel that myth just by existing. Queer folks are great at that. We're like, we are here. Queer and trans folks are like, guess what? I exist. And that makes the shift. So I wanted that.
Also, so let's talk a little bit about our spiritual toolboxes. This is a term that I read a lot through the book as well. And something I wanted to know, where do you start with building your own personal spiritual toolbox? What would you suggest to the audience?
Well, I would really suggest getting a copy of this resource that's been made. I think one of the things I'll also offer, and I do hope that the book really is made, and I made workbooks for each of the chapters because again, as a teacher, so there's lots of offerings. House of our Queer really is designed to say let's be in community while we figure out what are the tools that work for us, and it is actually better if we have different tools. Just like every other aspect of diversity that we know in community, us coming together with what works and that not being the same, we can make the community even better. And a quick reference that I do offer, one of the core principles for House of our Queer is trying to find balance in whatever your tools are, whatever you're using for your spiritual self, to kind of have a balance between things that are self-directed intuition building, that's like your magic, that's understanding your chart, whatever, that's manifesting, that's working with the moves, your things that you want, and then balancing that with ways that you can feel small and feel held and call in. So that might be tarot, that might be ancestors, that might be a higher power, it might be nature. But thinking about those two buckets and trying, I think, when we have too much of one or too much of the other, we can really get lost. And so just trying to figure out a balance for yourself.
Yeah. So before we open up some questions for the audience, I just want to ask you, so one of the themes of the book is the blessing of queerness. How do you think that people can, tap into their individuality through that motto while also still connecting to community?
I love that question. So the blessing of queerness is its own chapter, is its own thing, is the core principle for House of our Queer. I will say, I was in the pushing away space for so long. It was really tough for me to think about bringing spirituality back into my life. And I knew that if I was going to do that and I was going to open up this door, I needed to really center any of the spirituality and any of the offerings on the blessing, on this incredible gift and joy, because queerness has been that for me. Queerness has been that way and first way that I really was able to say, this is what I want for my life, and it's not this other thing that's been told for me. And so I didn't want it to be inclusion. I didn't want a spiritual center that was yeah, queer folks, you can be here. We'll see you in June. I was really thinking what is the centering of it look like? And so I have landed on the blessing of queerness. And I think that, folks often ask who is House of our Queer for? Who can this support? I had someone who at the launch in San Francisco was the organizer for the space, and she was I am straight, but I love everything you said, and I want can I buy this book? Can I be? When you talk about community, I think that everyone can benefit from a queer-centered community, and queerness in this, but I talk a lot about queerness just holding space, having expansiveness, and really letting that ripple out to the community, and that's beyond sexual orientation.
Yes. All righty. I'm telling you guys, this book really is amazing. I read through it in March. It was really life-changing for me, especially because how many of y'all grew up in church or have had experiences in church growing up? Yeah, it really hits deep, especially if you've had those experiences. But we're going to go ahead and open the floor for some questions. So how do you want to approach it? Do they come up here? Do they just...
Sometimes we'll do it folks can just ask it, but then you can repeat the question back just so that
everyone hears.
It gets picked up.
Okay, cool. Does anyone have any questions?
Awesome.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if the book addresses speaking back to those spiritual communities that we grew up in. Something I've become aware of in the past year is this whole ex-evangelical movement, which has really excited me to see that so many people are saying, you need to confront, because so many of us leave and we don't go back for good reason.
Yeah.
But then there's the problem of they don't get to hear about the harm that they cause. And, they aren't confronted with that. So I'm wondering if that's progressive.
Do you think we need to repeat it back, or do you think they'll be able to hear?
I think they're good.
I'll address it.
Or if you want to
I'll address it. Yeah. When I think about the book, and there's a difference between the book and like what House of Our Queer will do. The book really doesn't address that, because I've done advocacy for so long, and I really wanted this book to focus on and really center queer healing, what we need. And whenever we're doing advocacy and calling people in, it becomes about them. And so I think that's important work. I'm really proud of folks who are doing it. And there are things in my in-house worker that will focus on that. There's a version of this that I do as a presentation for church leaders that are looking for how to center queer folks and why they aren't there and how to bring them back. And so I'll do that work, but this book is for us. And so it's really, what can we take, what's for us? And I'll also say this book isn't for necessarily folks that are just in the pain place or dealing with trauma from church. There are mental health professionals who run trauma response groups who really address that level. So if anyone's interested in that, I'm happy to share resources for folks in that place. The book is really for folks that are ready, are kind of peaking, been in the pain place where I'm ready for something and I'm not sure what that is. I'm nervous about it, but something's missing and I don't know what.
Do we have any other questions? Yeah.
In the book, do you at all address, it's you kind of see the light, I guess, you step out of that place and it's you kind of want everyone else to kind of see the light too. But of course, not everybody is on that same wavelength. So it's do you at all address how to be able to handle those differences and them not understanding you now that you have kind of come to a lot of realizations?
Yeah, in the spiritual roots, early section, I talk a lot about what I call my coming out as queer and spiritual stage. And that was tough. I don't know what's coming out. It's tough. It's a tough one because, when I was coming out as queer, when I was leaving heteronormativity, I had a community. I knew who the folks were. I was leaving one community, I was joining another, and there was this that made it easier. And when I was coming out as queer and spiritual, and I was realizing that spirituality was important to me and something I was going to be doing, I was in I'm still in very leftist radical spaces, especially in the Bay, in California, where it wasn't being talked about, and I didn't know who I was going to. I didn't know where I was going towards, and there was a real fear I had of having this shift and having this change and being alone and being I don't know, and being left, and I had to really wrestle with that, and slowly, and then like I said, and now I'm fully out, right? I'm here sitting here doing this thing. But there was that time, and I think what I'll say is that what I hope is that folks are finding their light. I don't think I've found the light. I think that I'm trying to figure out what I do believe that everyone can benefit. Like I say, spirituality is a mental health support. Where are you going in your brain when you're trying to figure out why we're here, when you're pushed to your edge, and just as I call spiritual insurance, we don't always know when you're going to need it, but if you have a ritual, it's then it's there. You know, we've done a little bit of that. So I think that can be beneficial for everyone. And I know current folks, we are here living under tough times. And so I'm really interested in like our nervous system and folks kind of checking in, like where is like homophobia, racism, transphobia, like living in your body, and like what tools might help bring light to that, right? And so that's how I feel. I hope that the more we can kind of shift what the conversation is or what it looks like, folks can see themselves in it. And I also know it's not for everyone. That's okay.
Do we have any other questions at all? Go ahead.
I was wondering, as queers reclaiming spiritual practice, if you have any thoughts on how to bring the children and our families and our lives into those practices or those ideas.
I love this question. Yes, I absolutely think that this is really important for parents, for folks that have young ones, teachers, because I think, like I said, the idea that there's a separation, that there's like religion, spirituality, faith, belief, communities, and there's queer community over here, it's wrong for young people. I think that it's both untrue and can be harmful. Like I said, the rituals that I was raised in benefit me, not in the communities and the ways that they are, but there's something about that. So one of the things I will say, I have this dream of writing a children's book of just like good night, like bedtime ritual, you know, in like the queer community, and like what it would look like just with some of the tools I'm doing. But I think like anything else, you know, inviting young people into conversations, sharing about rituals and practices, sharing about different ideas around, like I said, how we call in and get support, how we like manifest and kind of direct our lives. And I think those are conversations that young people can be brought in on. That can really be beneficial.
That was a really good question, by the way.
Yeah.
All right. Do you want to take more questions, or how are we doing?
I also I like to use this as a time also for folks, if you want to share like why you're here, or if you want to share about your experiences in spirituality, like I'm happy to share mine. But the goal of us being here together is also to kind of build some community and see each other and have a chance to share. So I'm happy to, I'll take questions all day. I'll talk about this all day, and I do, but I'd also invite folks, if you want to kind of share your experiences, really open to that. It's no worries. I know. For you.
Hi guys, my name is Bridget. I grew up in a super Catholic family. Growing up as a kid, I didn't even know what a queer person was. Like when I found out, when my cousin told me like gay was like meant like gay men instead of being happy, I was like, oh, cool. I didn't even know that could be a thing. And then I was like telling my mom about it one day, and I was sitting at the table and she's like, don't talk about that. And I never spoke about it again until I was in college. And I started meeting, so they were like gay men, but never like queer women. Or so it wasn't until like after college I came out, but when I left home at 18, I left the church in a way. And you know, like Thich Nhat Hanh says something like you had said, like what does he say? Like if you grow up with a faith, it's difficult to break away from that. It's always kind of a part of you.
Yeah.
And like you had said, I kind of went through a pain place of, you know, being really angry with the church. And I still have a lot of complicated feelings working through therapy. Therapy. But I lost my train of thought. But I started going to church again when I was like 20. I just like kind of met you actually, but we weren't talking about it. Like I was going to like Forefront Church in Brooklyn, and kind of like figuring out like, oh, okay, like this feels right. Like my life feels better when I have spirituality in it. And I'm just so happy you're writing this book. It's beautiful. And I would love to see more like I would like love for anybody who like, I would love to do like more things like this with queer folks.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. And yeah, I get asked a lot, like, is there a house? Like, what is that? Where's the house? I do think church is very cheap right now. But the thing about what we in queer community, we don't necessarily have like the walls. We don't have the space. You know, the thing about church is like they hold all, I do energy work, like they hold all this energy because people are coming with their joy and their sorrow and their celebrations. They're coming on the 19th ordinary Sunday. Like we're coming for all of the things, and those walls hold the energy of everybody in that space. And so I think queer folks, we aren't quite sure, don't necessarily have like that space for us as a community. And I think that's why, you know, dance floors and clubs like hold so much energy and so much important for us, in addition to just the joy and spirit of the dance floor, which is a spiritual practice for me. But also I think I'm curious what that space is for us, or how we can come together and stir up kind of energy and magic. Over time.
Anyone else want to share? Yeah, go ahead.
So I grew up in a really like conservative Christian household, even though like my dad like, oh, talk up.
Yeah. Well, not like literally like volume one.
Yeah, my dad never really was or is super religious. He just kind of did things out of habit. So like it was weird like having my mom who was like super religious at church almost every day, and then my dad who like did the bare minimum. But unfortunately, like there's just like a lot of trauma that I had growing up in the church. I went to a non-denominational mega church. So unfortunately witnessed some things, especially when I started working with children. Witnessed some things that I just one day just didn't say a word and I left. I couldn't take it anymore. And I had a lot of anger towards the church, especially when it was like trying to advocate for the children, trying to advocate for, you know, people who didn't fit the mold, and it falling on deaf ears. And so I even still kind of have trouble when it comes to like certain messages that come out of the church, even if it's a good message. So like it's still a work in progress, but like I'm at a point where I'm like, okay, I'm trying to rediscover some parts of my own traditional religion, traditional African religion, as well as some things that I may discover that I may like about like Hinduism or Buddhism. You know, I'm just really just kind of reading, discovering, realizing the connections between everything. And so like I'm still in that discovery phase that I haven't fully landed on yet, but it's been a really fun, scary, and sad experience, but like it's one where I'm at now has been extremely relieving. That even though I'm going through all of the highs and lows and bumps and whatnot, like it's worth it. It's really worth it, because like I'm finding myself, I'm loving myself, and I feel like I can love people better.
That's beautiful. Yeah.
Sharing.
I'll share. So I'm Thai, as y'all know. So I grew up going to church, but my mom was like also, I like to call it very woo-woo. So she would like incense, like she would like collect crystals and like read tarot and things like that. So that was always very interesting for me growing up, like because she didn't talk about those things publicly. Obviously, it wasn't really as socially acceptable as it is today. But as I got older, especially going through puberty, realizing like, oh, I'm queer, like I like everyone, you know, I don't really care like what that outside looks like, realizing that, and then just going to church on Sundays and just hearing some of the messages, it just made me very angry, and I knew that it was a box that I didn't want to fit into. So I ended up leaving church when I graduated from high school and going to college, and I really like just found astrology. I'm a professional astrologer, as y'all know. So, but for me, astrology was just a way to really discover myself and really like give myself the freedom to track what was happening in my life, to be accountable, to have something to like be able to look at and be like, okay, like this is where I'm at. But I still do like believe in God, like still do like have those practices. So it's hard, like you said earlier, like when you grow up in a certain faith, it just kind of sticks with you like forever. But I feel like I'm in that place where I'm very comfortable with kind of having the best of both worlds, I guess I'll say. But yeah, like I love the book. I love the fact that you have brought us all here today to be able to like do this. This is so awesome.
Thank you for sharing. And yeah, astrology like is very much, I would say, like, you know, one of the most dominant religions in the queer community. It's very, very, very important. And that's one of the reasons I talk about, like, I'm not a professional astrologer, and I use astrology because I know that I can speak about the spirit, the energy, the feelings, what's the undercurrents of folks in my community a lot easier than other avenues. And I think that might shift over time. I think, you know, but I talk about it because I think that a lot of folks are using astrology, but not realizing that it's a spiritual practice. And I want to like us to be aware of, you know, why are we using things? What are we seeking? What are we looking for? And just being aware of that. I'm also seeing a lot of, I call it sun sign stereotyping, right? So I see that a lot. Like, I'm not gonna, you know, sit here and say that the Aries memes don't drag me. They drag me. They're accurate, right? I get them every day. They're always right. You know, and like, how are we making sure, right, that if we're gonna be a kind of community that needs to know your big three before we can go on a second date, what are we asking for? What are we looking for? And what are we getting? You know, and just like naming that and that being okay. Like,
Yeah, that's actually such a good point, especially because a lot of us have left religion or the church or whatever it is to kind of like not be confined in boxes, and doing that kind of like puts you right back into those boxes. Like,
absolutely. And that's one of the things I think, being raised in religion, I see it. I know what it looks like. I know it when we're following something, when we're being faithful to something. Like, I'm very aware of that. See that. And so being able to, I also think that's why I talk a lot about cancel culture in the queer community, and just like being mindful of that, because I was raised in excommunication culture. Like, I was raised where it's like, here's the line, here's what we believe. If you believe outside of it, there's the door. And so I think that sometimes if we're, you know, in any extreme, we can be modeling each other, mirroring each other on the left or the right without recognizing it if you're not talking to anyone or you don't come from those communities. And so I'm really just interested in, you know, how do we, again, like, focus on our healing, focus on the healing of our community, have accountability, of course, but what does it look like to make sure that we are not modeling something that we're trying to get away from, that we're so far away from it, we're just right back to it.
right, exactly. Well, I think that's gonna wrap up the Q&As and wrap up the conversation. But I mean, like I said, y'all, like, I really do recommend this book. I cannot say it enough. I don't even read that much anymore, honestly, because I don't have time. But when I picked this up, like, I could not put it down. I was reading it at night. I was reading it in the morning, like literally everywhere that I was going. So please, if you can, get a copy of it, read it. If you're looking to tap more just into your spirituality, or just like really observe who you are like as a spiritual being and reclaiming that, I really do recommend getting this book. And thank you again for writing this and for like having a great community like House of Art Queer, and just bringing people together and doing something so powerful for the community. You're awesome.
Thanks.
Thank you, Bex. Thank you, Ty. Like I mentioned, books will be coming on Wednesday. Bex is happy to sign a little sticker, which will then go in the book and
Yeah.
provide you a nice memory of this day. Thanks to everyone who joined us online and have a good one.
Yeah.
Bye.